Welcome everyone to 22 Minutes in Lending. I'm your host, Vince Passione, and I'm thrilled to have Victor Miguel Corro join us today. Victor's career has been dedicated to advancing the credit union movement globally. He spent over a decade at the World Council of Credit Unions, where he played a crucial role in connecting America's credit unions with their Latin American counterparts. Today, Victor serves as the CEO of Coopera Consulting, bringing his wealth of experience to drive innovation in the industry. Victor, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. Let's get started.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Victor, I've heard your background before. I think it's very unique. I love when people have a connection to credit unions the way you do. Could you spend just a few minutes talking about sort of your background and your connection to credit unions and your journey in the credit union industry?
It's interesting because my parents did start a credit union, a teacher's credit union in rural Panama. And I remember when I was a teenager, like every other night, we had like all these teachers from the school that my parents worked. They came to our house and they were always talking about something. In the end, it was just about starting a credit union because they were feeling financial pain. They didn't have the best banking relationship with the commercial bank or the state-owned banks. And so they started their own credit union. And now I think it's grown to be the fourth largest credit union in terms of assets in Panama. So my mom was member number one. My dad was member number two. After I came back to the United States and graduated and I needed a job. And the most interesting thing is that being in Wisconsin and around Madison, the World Council of Credit Unions at that point was looking for Latin American specialist, the person that had bilingual skills and had worked in Latin America. And so that my degree was in economics and Latin American studies. And so that's how I started 20 years of working at the World Council of Credit Unions. So from my parents, starting a credit union, starting to work at the World Council of Credit Unions, and then now as the CEO of Coopera Consulting, my life, professional life, has been dedicated to this industry, to this movement, to this space.
Excellent. No, I appreciate you sharing that. So let's jump in a little bit of terminology. So Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. Can you give me some of the distinctions and how do you identify?
I would say those are very imperfect labels that are trying to basically describe a constituency that is very nuanced and complex into something that is digestible and understandable, for people to market to or to just basically classify a large group of people as certain things. So Latinx, Latino, Hispanic, like I said, imperfect labels. I would say I identify first as an American, but then, a person who happens to be of Panamanian origin. So if you were to ask me, am I Latino, am I Latinx, or am I Hispanic, I will tell you, I'm from Janesville, Wisconsin, but my parents are from Panama. So that's what it is. And, usually identity is very nuanced and complex when it comes to the Hispanic population. And that's why there's never a really short explanation of what it is.
So let's break it down for me. 67 million, right? Hispanic, Latino, right? Individuals in the United States, 20% of the nation. Can you break it down further for me and give me a sense of our listeners of how it breaks out?
Yeah, if it's 67 million Hispanics in the United States. Again, in terms of identity, we don't see ourselves as a monolithic group. Largely, most of this 67 million, their background is they come from Mexico. Their families came from Mexico. They could be first, second, third generation. They could be fully acculturated to the United States. They may not be. Yet they may speak Spanish, they may speak English, and they may understand financial terminology and have a worldview that differs in 21 ways, because there's 20 plus countries in Latin America, each country very proud of their accent, their way to speak Spanish, their food, their history, their geography. And so that's why when we come to the United States, yes, we may be coming from Latin America, but then now we're acculturated into a whole new country, but still hold a lot of things that tie us back to our countries of origin. And at the same time, we have this dual, American identity. Some days you could feel completely and very American, and some days you really long for your family and where you came from. So it's always a very interesting lived experience.
So, Victor, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you had this quote, which I think kind of sums up your mission. So I'm going to share it with the listeners. If you don't intentionally, deliberately, and proactively include, you will unintentionally exclude. Okay, so this is all about inclusion.
Yeah,
How do you get the credit union's attention here, right? We talked earlier, right? When I started almost 2 decades ago, serving credit unions, there were probably 15,000 credit unions. Today, there are 4,750, I believe. So it's an industry that's shrinking. It's about 147 million members, and growth has kind of slowed the past couple of years. This should be an easy message. There's 67 million Americans out there, right, that need credit unions who would resonate with your message of inclusion and sort of your first premise, which is trust, right? You have to get
right.
them. So, A, how's it going? And how do you direct people to do this?
Well, first of all, obviously, we need to be very aware of the data and the seismic demographic shift that is occurring in the United States. In between 10 and 15 years, we're going to become a majority country, meaning that if we count all the Asians, Hispanics, and African Americans, we will have a majority people of color country. And Koreans were created with a mission, the mission of financial inclusion and financial well-being. So do we include everyone? Yes, that's our mission. And then we have to really have plans to include the most marginalized consumer. And the most marginalized consumer usually is a person that is a recent immigrant who doesn't speak the language. I'm not saying that this is the only, constituent that's the most marginalized, but it's high in that priority for credit unions. So having that clarity of mission is very important, so that the credit unions activate their cooperative business model and their mission of financial inclusion. So that's being intentionally inclusive. If we have the data that tells us, yes, there's 67 million Hispanics in the United States, and this is a very nuanced constituency, and we know that they're largely unbanked, they don't have the best relationship with banking, then us as credit unions really need to have a plan for them.
So as you go out and you talk, is this a message that people are leaning into, they're leaning back from? It's still early for them to understand it, because if I think about an industry, especially now, right? I mean, I had Barry Kirby on from Union Credit, and he always talks about the need to get younger, and that by the end of the year, the average age of a credit union member would be 57 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so need to get young, need to grow. It seems like this is a message that people should be gravitating to. What are the obstacles, that you're seeing when you're out and you're speaking to groups of credit unions?
Largely is the not knowing the data, not having, mindfulness around, the demographics of the country, of the state, of the county, or the local level. We always said we are people helping people, but what we really need is a serious exercise in segmentation, so that we understand, the different segments and the different lived experiences that we have around our field of membership. Consumers want to be seen, heard, listened to, and act upon. And, to know that somebody may be, second generation Hispanic and their country of origin or their family is Bolivia, it's very important, because those folks will understand the world in a certain way. And, they may not be in line with a traditional or legacy member of credit unions. So the more that we understand about the people around us and the growing and youngest segments of our communities, the more relevant we will be into the future as credit unions.
So I was looking at this Brookings study, and there's some of your work that's referenced it as well. And one of the big issues is trust, and you talk about trust all the time. We saw the banking crisis recently, right, where we had a whole bunch of banks that disappeared. And I remember listening to many of the leaders of the credit unions talk about trust, right? What we have is trust. So do you believe that first that is that one of the big issues, distrust from this demographic of financial institutions? And then do you think the credit unions have a leg up on trust when it comes to this demographic?
Yeah, trust is fundamental for retail financial services, and there's usually a distrust in consumers when it comes to banking, especially if they have been quote unquote burned before by not the best practices. So yeah, credit unions have actually that cooperative business model that resonates a lot, let's say, with the Hispanic constituency because they're their mindset, and this is our generalization, is less individualistic and more collectivistic. So we think as Hispanics more as to how our decisions are going to impact our family, our loved ones and friends, rather than individually first. So having a cooperative model resonates a lot with this constituency. But the other thing is that human nature, we would like to see ourselves reflected in the staff that a credit union has, especially if we're most marginalized. When I came to this country, I didn't know English. If I found somebody who could speak Spanish at a branch of a credit union, for me, that was a win because then I could communicate, I could convey exactly what I meant without, having a language barrier in between. So that when a credit union, when a bank, when a financial institution shows that they understand of that mindset, that generates trust. If they see the credit union also, interacting and being partners of community-based organizations that understand certain constituencies and, advocate for certain constituencies, yes, then that there's trust there because you see a legitimate effort to help and not so much to sell things to a consumer. So that's an important thing to at least starting generating trust.
Now, how much does technology play into this? In that same study, there was a whole discussion about engagement levels from the Hispanic community and other minority groups as well, where technology is being used and adoption of fintechs because there's a trust that's being created because of this technology. Now, some of it's product related, but just on the fintech discussion, do you think the fintechs are winning a larger share of this population versus traditional banks and credit unions?
At least at the beginning, one of the things that we need to understand is that the Hispanic consumer market in the United States is very young. The median age is about 28, 29. So these are digital first consumers. And so they would look and engage with a brand when that brand is easy to engage with. There's no friction with them. And usually, a mobile phone or a cell phone provides that frictionless experience and exposure to a brand. This is why fintechs are, very successful at getting the eyes of these constituencies. However, what we notice, and I do a lot of focus group with young Hispanics, they don't want only that transactional relationship. They actually want a transformational relationship. The credit unions had the key to have the transactions at the front end, but then as you bring them into the fold and then you start advocating for that consumer to engage with more products and services that actually lead to financial well-being and a healthy, financially healthy consumer, then from the transactions, from having a checking account, from having a way to, pass cash from one person to another to do payments, the credit union then starts understanding that consumer. And in the end, understand that the consumer really wants is to build credit, to, acquire assets and to, purchase a home ultimately, because that in many minority communities, that's what is missing. Building wealth to then pass it to the next generation. So the credit unions would start and fintechs would start with a transactional thing. for transactions, but then, they will move on to the transformational relationship with that consumer.
So in your work with credit unions, do you talk specific about products, and are certain products important to have, right? Understanding it's not a monolithic group, but if
Right.
you think about products and services, like in the same study, and we talk about over 8% of Hispanics are unbanked or underbanked. And of those, when asked, 21% said the reason is they do not have the ability to meet that minimum requirement to open up that checking account, or it's
Right.
the fees. So is there a product suite that you start with that say, look, this is a must-have?
Yes, it really depends on who we are trying to serve. It is important for, at least if we talk about the Hispanic consumer, it's important for that Hispanic consumer to understand that they're not being pigeonholed as Spanish only speaking, as low income, and as a person that need an IT number rather than a social security number to open an account. The person needs to know that that organization has a wide variety of products that go from those transaction things to, wealth management, because we cannot pigeonhole Hispanics as just, immigrant and poor, because that's not true. More than 80% of the Hispanics are actually U.S. citizens, and a large majority were actually born here. That's something that we don't understand in many places. But if you're going to focus on the most marginalized consumer, yes, you need to accept an IT number rather than a social security number. You need to accept, a low balance savings or checking account. Then you need to start, with a more basic products like just like a signature loan that would be paid in, less than 6 months, so that as you advocate for that consumer to, to have good repayment practices, the credit union starts reporting this to the credit bureau, so that the person starts building their credit and then really, becoming a subject of credit in the United States. Now, that's one thing, but then you also need to have the more sophisticated product for those Hispanics that may be high wealth, high income, or business owners. So then you don't convey the image that, stereotypically, I think that Hispanics are all Spanish-speaking, recent immigrants and poor. So that's a very important thing to really convey with our products and services and the way that we communicate, with our communities.
We had a couple of credit unions on. We had Tanya Sturgeon she's the CEO of Guadalupe Credit Union in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Great story about using ITIN lending, and I believe she's also a CDFI. So you did a study with Filene, right? How do you position that with your clients as a growth engine?
Well, again, it starts with the analytics, with knowing the demographics. Is we are living in an area of the country that is seeing, let's say, the largest constituency when it comes to immigrants come from Venezuela at the moment. And then you find that population is growing in your field, within your field of membership. Then the credit union needs to know that in order to start including these folks, they're recent immigrants, may be asylum seekers, who knows, what their immigration status may be. But in order for them to start plugging into American life, they need to open an account. And many times they may not have a social security number. Yeah. Guess what? The ITIN identification number given by the Treasury, it's a way that a credit union can use to open that account, coupled with a government issued ID, and it could be from another country. So the credit union needs to start there. And that is a clear signal to that most marginalized recent immigrant that, yes, you're welcome here. And actually, there's a financial institution that will welcome you with open arms. Guadalupe Credit Union is one of the best examples in the country that really have understood this. And they put that most marginalized, yes, recent immigrant segment as a growth engine, because guess what? Not that many banks or other financial institutions are preoccupied or having a plan for them. So finding this underserved niche within the market will start generating trust, and that trust will mean, higher market share and a lot of word of mouth saying, yes, Guadalupe Credit Union or X Credit Union is really into understanding us as recent immigrants to the United States. So that would be the start of a plan and a growth engine for many, many credit unions.
So you've been at this for a while, right? In the industry. How are we doing? And how do you think the next 10 years lay out when you think the work that you're doing at Coopera and with some of your other partners?
I think, like that basically the sense of urgency that we need to have as an industry. We may be very distracted by shiny objects, and what we're not seeing is, how our people are changing. That's what the issue is. And when you know that the country is changing, the identities are very varied and diverse, that's worth investing money in.
It was interesting. I almost fell into this theme and you took me away from it. But the idea that you have 67 million Hispanics in this country, and that the discussion is about things like, well, what about ITIN? What about CDFI? What about access to, low balance checking accounts? And your comment that no, you're missing it, right? Yeah, we certainly have some of that where we have a portion of that population that's been marginalized or underbanked or unbanked. But that's not who this population is. This is becoming, right? These are Americans in this country, many second, third generation, right? Who are now moving into their financial lives, right? They're younger, they're a digital group, who now are asking, like in the Brookings research, the fact that cryptocurrency of interest is typically someone that's building wealth that has interest in cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
So I feel like I almost fell into that trap with you. You kept pulling away from it, and now I understand why. You're like, well, wait a minute. These folks aren't all walking around trying to figure out how to open up a checking account. They're
Right.
for a full suite of services. They're trying to build generational wealth. They are looking for a trusted advisor to help them do that.
Yeah, I think it's the narrative that we get from the media that basically pigeonholes everyone who's Hispanic as recent immigrant. And if you were to ask the Hispanic constituency in the United States, immigration is not the first thing in their heads. It's economics. They're part of this country. It's a mainstream market. 67 million people
Right.
is a heck of a lot of people. And that is lost in the narrative as well. And then you get pigeonholed as, again, Spanish speaking, poor and othered. This is much a mainstream market that speaks two languages, just happen to have a dual identity. And the older you get in, second, third, fourth generation, you're completely assimilated. You don't think of yourself as Hispanic anymore. You may think, oh, I'm multicultural or multiracial, but you identify mostly as American. But our country still doesn't see us as fully, 100% American. That's something that you do have to contend with, and that has, many currents or brands may not be aware of how you see, you're perceived, and then how you see yourself.
It was interesting. I kind of sensed that when we were going through. It's like, well, yeah, it's interesting, but right, it's more about how do you allow your credit union to understand the numbers, understand the demographics in their trading area, and then have their credit union reflect those demographics so that all these different segments in the country, right, feel comfortable, right, banking with you because you want to see yourself, right? I mean, look, I'm
Right.
Italian American. My grandparents immigrated to this country, right?
Mhm.
And they were educated, but unfortunately didn't speak English, and that had a huge impact, right, on their ability to get work in the country. But now I'm sitting here, and that's not I view myself as being American, right? I don't view myself as being Italian American. To your comment, so yeah, interesting. And I think that's where it brings it back to the numbers. To your point earlier, you need to know the demographics in your trading area and how you're really catering to it, especially when you go back to this. Look, in less than 20 years, this is going to be a minority majority country. And how are you going to make certain that you reflect what your trading area looks like if you're trying to have those folks become your customer?
Right. And, digital savvy is the constituency that grows their income the fastest, the most entrepreneurial. Last week, I was sharing with a group in Portland, Oregon, if you were to take the 67 million Hispanics in the United States and make them a country, they will be the sixth largest economy in the world,
Right.
And the one that's growing really, really fast. And so it's a segment that cannot be overlooked. It's not well represented when it comes to politics or office or even in the structure of power for many factors, many reasons. But as we go forward, you're going to see this market segment really, really rise to the occasion and be very visible.
Well, Victor, we're pretty much up to our time limit. Thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. And as always, thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe so you can catch future episodes, and I'll meet you back here at our next 22 Minutes in Lending.
Thank you for listening to the 22 Minutes in Lending podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You'll find links to any resources mentioned in the show notes. If you're enjoying our show, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review.